Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to this podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return for future episodes and new content. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, I welcome you back. And as always, I hope that today's episode is one that you'll find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So, as we close out the calendar year, I just want to remind folks who are with us today, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting that red subscribe button. And if you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts, make sure you subscribe there as well. Of course, we do accept monetary donations for those who want to contribute to the growth of this podcast. You can do that through Cash App or Venmo. So for those who are on Cash App, our handle is #IDTALK4ED. And for those who are on Venmo, our handle is @KWAMESM. So that's @KwameSM. And to catch past episodes of this podcast, you can go to our main website at identitytalk4educators.com. And as always, thank you for your support. So, as we wind down this calendar year 2022, I want to do another episode focusing on the importance of unpacking the counter narratives, especially when we talk about Black culture. We know that we are in a state of education in the U.S. where books are being banned. History is still being whitewashed as we speak. So today is an episode where we're going to be talking about the importance of sharing these stories in our classrooms. And today's guest is somebody who has been doing immense research in this area when we talk about storytelling and the importance of exposing the positive aspects of Black history through narratives. So without further ado, I want to bring on Dr. Crystal Menzies to the podcast to talk with us about emancipated education and all the great work she's doing in this arena. So let's bring on Crystal. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Be here. I'm good. Excited to be here. I love your intro music.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So there's so much to talk about, but before we get in, I know it's daylight savings. I know that the extra hour helped me out a lot getting that sleep in. What about you?
Likewise. For the first time in a couple months, I woke up, got out of bed feeling refreshed. Not that anxiety of like, oh snap, I have to hurry up and get up and do things. So it was wonderful.
All right. Nice. But yeah, let's definitely get right in because there's so many questions I have for you. But of course, this is Identity Talk for Educators Live. So we do talk about identity. We talk about just the personal stories of our guests who come on here. So just to start us off, please let us know what brought you into this field of education.
So I guess the summary statement would be I wanted to teach 6 through 12 students, so grade 6 through 12, what the history I learned in college, because I was angry that I had to go to college to learn a lot of what I learned. So I grew up in a family that valued education and like out of school learning in particular. So we were always at museums. If there was a Black festival in Southern California, we were going there. They would, saw Malcolm X in theaters when I was 10 years old and then read the book. And my parents kind of like cultivated that. Like they didn't say like, oh, this book is too advanced for you. They're like, nope, right. Here you go. And then let's discuss it. So there's some stuff I knew, but then I went to an HBCU And that was like my first experience with critical pedagogy. And I was like, how come I didn't learn this stuff earlier? Like within a formal system, you know? And
Yeah.
so when I graduated, and my grandfather was a teacher as well. So when I graduated, I was kind of following in his footsteps to like teach the history that I wish I learned a lot earlier. And I didn't feel like you had to go to a HBCU or go to college and take an African American studies class or Latinx studies in order to learn this type of history. We should be exposed to it much earlier. And so that's what brought me to education.
All right, cool. And we'll talk more about your Spelman experience in a little bit. But just staying on your childhood and growing up, I'm interested in knowing how our guest dealt with their upbringings and what their schooling was like back then. So I'm gonna pose this question to you.
Mhm.
During your own schooling in K to 12, were there any internal or external struggles that you dealt with as far as embracing your identity and showing up as who you truly are?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, as far as racial identity, I had a pretty strong sense of self. I think because of all the experiences my parents exposed me to.
Right.
Um, I remember telling my mom, I was in elementary school. I don't know how old I was, but I asked her to stop buying me white dolls. And my mom had a look of like surprise, but then also pride on
Yeah.
her face. And again, I can't pinpoint where that came from. I just knew I was surrounded by something like, wait a minute, this ain't right. And I was also very tall for my age, looked more mature for my age. So I always stood out as a Black girl in particular.
Mhm.
There's something called adultification, which
Yes.
can have a lot of negative consequences, especially for those of us who are girls. So being the tall, like bigger Black girl, I stood out in ways I didn't want to stand out, and I got teased for a lot of those things. And so
Mm.
I became like very quiet, very shy. I didn't really feel safe in a lot of spaces. And yeah, I'd say that's the gist. I didn't want to be noticed. I just wanted to be a fly on the wall.
So, just knowing the struggles you dealt with, what were some of the ways in which you tried to navigate the school spaces you were in?
Books helped me a lot. Literature, like finding stories that I resonated, that folks who looked like me who had similar stories through books. I saw a quote and I'm going to forget it. I'm not going to say it correctly, but
Right.
it's like, we only get one life, but through books, you get to live 1,000 lives.
Mm.
And so that was very much my experience. I became more empathetic as a result of my experiences, more of a listener, more of an observer. And as far as informing like how I am as an educator, I definitely became more of an advocate for my students because I wanted to create that safe space for them.
For sure. So, so you're coming from Cali, and you decide to go cross coastal
Hmm.
all the way down to the ATL for your HBCU experience at Spelman. So I'm interested in knowing what prompted you to go to Spelman, and how did that time over there impact you, not just personally but professionally?
Hmm. Well, there's like looking back, you can identify the things that led me to Spelman, but at the time, I didn't realize this full picture was coming. So early on, one, there was a different world, which was set in a historically Black college, and I was just again
Yeah, Hillman,
blown
right?
away. Yep, blown away that there's a place that all Black people exist. Like, wait,
Sure.
what is this? My dad was reading a book called Conversations, which was written by Dr. Janetta B. Cole, who at the time was president of Spelman. And so he was telling me about Spelman and how it was like all Black women's school. Like, what? Again, I didn't know this existed. What are you talking about? But I was also really into basketball. I played. I was not good, but I loved watching college basketball. And at that time, Duke and Berkeley were like really good squads. So
Right.
I was like, I don't know, if I'll go the Spelman route, because athletics and stuff, but I'll look at schools that are good schools that also have strong athletic programs, so I can like be at the games and things. So visited all the campuses, visited Cal's campus, visited Duke's campus, and Spelman was the last campus I visited. And again, it was I didn't know this type of place could exist. I didn't even know what I was missing. We all kind of got together. We stayed with upperclassmen. So we're all high school students staying with upperclassmen. We all meet together in like the lobbies of our dorms, and the upperclassmen are telling us why they chose Spelman. And a lot of folks talked about being the Black spokesperson. A lot of folks talked about like continuing a family legacy of attending HBCUs. But the Black spokesperson really hit me. I didn't grow up in a Black-white paradigm. My community was mostly Latinx, with a large proportion of Black students and a large proportion of Asian students who were like Filipino and Vietnamese. So there were like 5 white kids in my schools, but it was still not majority Black environments. And so I did not know what was possible I did not know it was possible to be in this type of space. And I was sold. Like before we even left Atlanta, I submitted because all the programs were for people who got accepted but hadn't chose it yet. So before we even left Atlanta, we went to Packard Hall and like submitted my intent to enroll form.
All right, cool. So then you spend all that time in Atlanta, and during your undergrad, what were you studying?
So I started off as bio, and because I love the biological sciences, but I wanted to be, my family is Guyanese, my dad's side of the family. So it's like, be a doctor. It's kind of like the only pathway. But at Spelman's a liberal arts college, so we all have to take classes all over the place. So all freshmen or freshwomen have to take African-Diaspora in the world. And that's the course that like rip the blindfold off. We're reading Menzies, a lot of Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks was the very first speaker I ever encountered in college too.
Wow.
So just like having my mind is just blown on a regular basis. And I'm like, I want to continue this path of learning. And so changed my major to history. So I majored in history, minored in Spanish because I studied abroad. And Spelman study abroad programs are very Black centered. So like we went to Dominican Republic, and there's a lot of analysis of the social construction of race in comparison to the US and Dominican Republic, So regardless of where they sent you, they're going to find the Black parts. We went to Costa Rica. Yes. We went to Limon, that was settled by Jamaican migrants who were brought to like build the railroad, and then Costa Rican government was like, we're not going to pay for you to go back. Sorry. So we experienced that Costa Rica too, not just the nice, Limon is beautiful, but it wasn't just we're hanging out at the beach. It's like, we're also learning about the Black experience. So that's what I studied while I was there. And again, it was my first experience with critical pedagogy, just like critically analyzing the world and systems and structures that we normalize. Like, this is just the way things are. Starting to pose like, how do things get to be the way things are? And is this the way things have to be? And then also just being around Black folks from across the diaspora. So I wasn't just around Cali folks. We got the New York folks who was fresh to death on a regular basis, okay? Chicago folks who were very Southern to me in many ways. I was like, this is surprising, but then you find out all their grandparents are from Mississippi. It's so seeing people's different trajectories in life, like meeting Black folks. So Spelman has this broad spectrum of socioeconomic status, okay? All the Black people. But it was my first time also meeting Black folks from upper middle class and upper class backgrounds. So found out Black people owned homes in Martha's Vineyard for like over a century. And I was like, wait a minute, huh? I thought that's where like the Kennedys and stuff hang out. You mean Black folks?
Right.
So just to expanding my awareness of Black experiences and Black stories was definitely an impact on me.
Yeah, and that's always the interesting part about being in the HBCU. You realize how intersectional the Black experience is on all different levels. So you spend your time in Atlanta. you eventually graduate from Spelman. And I understand that not only were you interested in bio and history, but you also have an interest in math as well, which I always gravitate towards because being a math teacher is always
Mhm.
dope to see someone else who also has some experience in teaching math. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit more about that, how you got into teaching math.
Well, I taught 8th grade social science, but my current research is on math, which is
Okay,
ironic.
yes.
So yeah, I taught social science, saw a lot of shenanigans. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Right, right.
Um, then entered my doctoral program where I studied urban education, which is like critical race theory. How did these schools become the way they are? Left, entered the nonprofit world, and then returned to research and really became interested in math identity because of my story when it came to math. I really liked science, the biological sciences. I did not like anything that had to do with math because it stemmed from when I was 6 years old and trying to learn how to borrow. And I really struggled with learning with borrowing. And I kept saying, like, I can't. And my dad got really angry at me for saying I couldn't, stop saying you can't. But it really, my little 6-year-old brain was like, if something makes my dad this angry, I don't think I want to do it. But then as an educator and then as a researcher in the navigating nonprofit world, started to see how much our academic identities influence what we think our paths could be or what they can't be. So as my current research really wanted to look at how is math identity shaped and formed for Black students in particular.
Mm. And then I do remember you were telling me a story about the time that you were teaching your social science classes during those early
Mhm.
years in the classroom, and just how your teachers, I don't know if it was your colleagues, but I think your principals and the administrators were responding to that. So during that time, what really, you were already interested in learning more about the history, but what about that experience sparked that interest even more to really
Mhm.
dig deeper into that?
Um, Great question. I was so 8th grade US history in California and probably across the nation.
Yeah.
Starts the first time you experience Black people in the curriculum is slavery.
Mm.
And all the standards that are tested that have to do with Black people are related to slavery, the Civil War, barely anything on Reconstruction, which was the most radical period in US history. And then that's it. And then our curriculum, we didn't get to the civil rights movement or anything. So I'm noticing that my student, because I'm teaching them the history I didn't learn, not just the brutality of enslavement, but how its tentacles are everywhere. Current
Hmm.
and past economic systems, how we structured our Constitution. When most of the people who create the Constitution, James Madison was the father of the Constitution, was the wealthiest or one of the wealthiest slaveholders in the state of Virginia. So there's no neutrality here when we're developing a system of laws and structures. So teaching all that. But I noticed my kids were kind of feeling low. Their energy was low with these types of lessons. And then one of my Black male students, he was like, why are we talking about Black folks all the time? And I was like, what? But then when I dug a little deeper, it was like, it's depressing. Everything I'm learning about Black people is depressing. And so I had to check myself as an educator, like, oh, I'm giving you the stuff I was angry I didn't learn sooner, but there's also stuff that I wish I learned sooner that was focused on our resistance,
Give
rebellion,
you joy.
exactly, our cultural production, like the impact we've had on this globe, and
Yes.
the soul of America, as the souls of Black folks, as Du Bois said.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to teach you a lesson on slave rebellions. So there is a California standard on rebellions of enslaved folks, but it's a low priority standard, meaning it's less likely to be on
On
the
the test.
test.
Mhm.
So just that when I'm planning the lesson, I don't know if this is coincidence or if the principal got wind. who was a white woman, got wind of what I was teaching. I was observed that day. And I was like very rarely observed. My kids did really well on tests. They did really well. So I was kind of left alone for the most part. Got observed and got written up. One, because it was not a high priority standard, but then had questions about why I was teaching this subject material. And so I tried to explain what I'm teaching is not just about content and about a test. I'm also paying attention to my students' like well-being as they're engaging with this.
As you should. That's what we're supposed to do.
Right. And I'm like, my kids do good. Leave me alone. Kind of thing. Like we do all the metrics you like, they do well on. So I thought I'd get a little bit of leeway. But that was my first, when we talk about systems and structures, that was my first taste of how systems stop what we learn and what we prioritize in learning. So
Yes.
Not just being written up by the principal, like the interpersonal pieces, but also what the state values as the type of knowledge you need to know in order to be considered, whatever the purpose is for these tests anyway. And then lost some students to violence over time. Notice my students, as our school became more like regimented, how like they're over time, a couple years in, most of the students were like, do we need to know this for the test? Do we need to know this for the test? And I'm like, we need to know this for life, people. And we would, get to the point where they were learning for the joy of learning, but it took work, because they had been their value is how they do on this. So if it's not going to do something that contributes to how I feel about myself, let's go. As far as the test, let's not do it. And so it's from there that I decided to pursue my doctorate. Just wanted to study more of these economic factors that impacted what happens in the classroom.
And in talking about your doctorate, I know with your doctoral work, you do focus on community cultural wealth, which is a framework that Dr. Terioso coined and framed. So I do know a bit about the framework, but if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about what it is and how it can be used to help Black and brown children succeed in the classroom and beyond that.
Yeah, so community cultural wealth, as you mentioned, presented by Dr. Tara J. Yoso, really wanted to present a counter narrative to like the deficit narratives of for her research, Latinx students in schools, and identify the different types of capital that Latinx students exhibit. So aspirational, navigational, I'll get out to those in a minute. Then when I was doing my, what do I actually want to study for this, to actually finish this thing? I really wanted something that did present a counter story to the deficit framing. Even people who talk about the structures and how the structures impact schooling, it still kind of reifies this deficit mindset about Black children in schools. So I was like, I want to see what this framework looks like for Black students in Philadelphia who are considered academically successful. What are their experiences? What types of capital are they using? And so observe some students in their schools, in a nonprofit program, and sometimes in their communities. So the framework has 6 types of capital: aspirational capital, linguistic capital, social capital, resistant capital, navigational, I can't remember if I said that, and familial capital. So really, I noticed that students were tapping into their community cultural wealth to navigate these institutions. So while the rhetoric might be, oh, they're adopting white normative capital, and that's why they're succeeding, it was like, no, a lot of their strengths and skills and knowledge is coming from their families, storytelling about kind of imbuing students with aspirations, even though they can't see it or experience it now, like hope for a better future. Lots of storytelling around cautionary tales. A lot of parents did this in my research. So they were like, here's what I did, and here's why I regret it, and I want better for you, type of experiences. And then just the way students navigated their peer groups in their neighborhoods, their peer groups in their schools, and adults in the schools. So you would see them take on different personas to be physically safe, psychologically safe, and to be validated by teachers and other adults in schools. So that was my dissertation research. I really wanted to show us in a different light.
And so often we talk about deficit-based narratives versus asset-based narratives. And then we think about community cultural wealth. It's really just a way to assign value to our learners.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's where you can get the assets
Mm-hmm.
and just really change the lens in terms of how we view student achievement
Yes.
and the traits that we would consider necessary for student success, not just within the classroom, but even beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially, what we're trying to get our students to realize is that we're not just here to pass a test.
Yes.
That's really low in the priority list.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about assigning tools, giving you tools that you can use for your own liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And also for the liberation of folks within your community and beyond that. So that's really what gravitated me towards community cultural wealth models. It's just a way that forces us to reframe how we look at what it is for a learner to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I really wanted teachers to be able to identify, that's what my current research looks at. How are teachers in high cognitive demand mathematics classrooms, so what we would call rigorous classrooms, cultivating and leveraging the community cultural wealth of their students? So like operating under the assumption that our students have this cultural wealth. And it's my job to like cultivate it and bring it out of them. Like a reframing of teacher mindsets and how that translates to the actual practices that we use in the classroom.
Yes, for sure. And all this work has extended into you launching your own company, the EmancipatED, so ED as in education.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about how you decided, okay, I'm going to just go ahead and start my own business to really just focus on this work even more. And what are you trying to accomplish with the EmancipatED?
Mm-hmm. Whew, great question. I'm trying to change the world. I so
Just
after
like picking the brain, right?
right, exactly. Exactly. I after my doctoral program, so as a critical race theorist, I did find I would I started to feel like, what can I do? You know, these systems have existed a very long time. They keep morphing and changing and shifting to keep having the same outcomes. What can I do? But I find I have like less of an existential crisis when I'm working directly with youth. So I left. So after I graduated, entered the nonprofit space. Pretty naive. So these are not grassroots nonprofits. They are well-funded nonprofits founded by white folks that typically parachute into Black and Brown communities to save them. But I was very naive at the time. And as someone who had the knowledge base of like anti-racist praxis, I would see words being used, but I wouldn't see the actions to back up the words.
Mm-hmm.
And as an educator, I never assume it's intentional. I'm like, oh, we just don't know what that looks like. Here, let me help you out. So I would speak out about things. I was tapped to lead different DEI initiatives begrudgingly. I was like, this is not why I signed up for this job, okay? But they're like, you know things. So like Tyrion from Game of Thrones, you drink and you know things. So I had a lot of like support from people like implementing the work in our program, but had some negative experiences with leadership in the program. And I'm like, dang, I'm doing the things that you claim is the mission and vision of the organization. So why am I being punished for what you said you wanted to do?
Right.
and experienced that again in another organization. So really started to feel like, where can I go? And where can I be a liberated being, or attempt to be? Because of course I'm still on an unlearning journey myself. And I'm surrounded by these systems that don't want you to unlearn anything. They want you to just slap new language on the same things. And so also face existential crisis. It's a common theme in my life. Of like, where can I go? I don't know what to do. I have a friend named Helen who used to always talk about like creating what you want. Like if what you want doesn't exist, create it yourself. And I'm like, I never saw myself as a creative, a creator, an entrepreneur. But in that last position of like, where am I actually, can I go? Tap back into my historical knowledge of Maroon communities, which have always been an obsession of mine, just because it was one of those things like, wow, I did not learn this earlier, consuming all I can about Maroons, but never connecting it to my day-to-day life. And I realized the process of becoming a Maroon and like Maroonage in general could be a blueprint for how I navigate my life and like how we bring other folks together who want to be free folks surrounded by these oppressive systems. So for those who are like, well, you keep talking about Maroon communities, what are they? So Maroon communities are, I'm using present tense because some still exist,
Yes.
free rebel Black societies that existed throughout the Americas. So they were founded by formerly enslaved Africans who ran away from enslavement and created their free hidden communities. So like jungles, swamps, mountains, places that were treacherous and difficult to get to, and created their free societies. And some were, small, maybe a couple kinship communities there, and then some were massive nation states like Palmares in Brazil, which the numbers vary, but at its height, we know it was at least 20,000 people. Some estimates are 30,000 folks. So pretty much nation states within what we call the Americas nowadays.
All right. And so we know that you've done a lot of work with the Maroon communities. And I would love for you to just share what that process was like, because so often when we're creating narratives about different communities, and this is part of the problem with our history classes, and has been a problem for years. It's always written from a lens of someone that hasn't had the live experience.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about how you were able to collaborate with some of these Maroon communities to get those accurate narratives out to folks who may not be familiar with the communities.
Mm-hmm. Great question. It actually started before I even decided to do anything formal with Maroon communities. I like to treat myself to trips, even though I was broke as a graduate student. So I, as a graduation gift to myself, traveled to Guyana, traveled to Trinidad, and went to Colombia. And in Colombia, there's a Maroon community called Palenque that still exists, and it's existed 400 years now, almost 400 years. And they speak their own language. It's called Pelenquera. They all speak Spanish also, but they have their own language that's a mixture of Spanish, Portuguese, and African languages. Their religion is a hodgepodge of a lot of African-centered beliefs. And so I visited again. I'm not even thinking about, I'm gonna do a business. I just wanted to see how these communities that I've been reading about in books live. And now communities vary. Okay, there's diversity amongst Maroons, but and then through there, just had like a fantastic experience. Just how folks treated us like family, even though we were tourists and strangers. We ended up going to lunch when we were leaving with a couple of the men from the Maroon communities, and like so we stayed in contact over time. And then when I decided this is the thing I wanted to do, I was like, I'm not, to my knowledge, of Maroon descent, and I need to have Maroon folks involved in this curriculum development process. So reached out to the folks I knew in Palenque. I also speak Spanish. Now my Spanish is rusty. But most of this was going on in Spanish over WhatsApp and some Zoom calls. Then I reached out to people I knew in Jamaica. Like I did a service learning trip in my doctoral program and they have like a side weekend trip to one of the Maroon communities out there. So, reached out to that network, who reached out to another network, who put me in contact with a guy in Akampong, which is another Maroon community in Jamaica. And so went to travel to Akampong. I've drugged 2 of my friends with me because, again, it's very, very remote. And we went hiking. This is a kind of a funny story in hindsight. So we get there, there's a cave called the Peace Cave, which is where one of the leaders, Cujo, used to like sit and think and plot and strategize. It's also where like a treaty was signed to end the war with the British. So talking on the phone, I was like, I really love to see the Peace Cave. They're like, okay, great. It's a short hike. Was it a short hike? No, it was a very long hike. And it was me and my friend. One friend stayed back in the town. And then there's 4 guys, some with machetes. And I was like, I don't know if this is a smart decision, Crystal. But we were very well taken care of. The machetes were I slipped and fell so many times because I was not prepared. I'm thinking of California hiking trails.
Yeah, right.
This is legit jungle. The path is this thin. I got my sneakers on. So I kept slipping and falling. So they took the machetes to cut a pole for me so I can navigate, carried our bags. It was like we felt, and that was another thing I've experienced in Ghana and the other Maroon communities I've visited, is how protected and safe I feel as a woman. So anywho, the person we connected with there also helped with the project. And then through other friends found a woman from one of the Maroon communities in Brazil. So those were the 3 communities I tapped into to one, interview and learn their stories, learn their histories. I would draft a piece of because I sell hidden history cards. So just a brief introduction to these communities and people. And so after I draft something, I'd send it to them for their feedback. Is this right? Is this accurate? Especially with the images too. Some of the people I'm featuring, they were around hundreds of years ago. And I didn't want people from Akampong or Nanny Town to look at it like, this ain't Queen Nanny.
Right.
And so they help with that process as well. So the first, I mentioned Queen Nanny because one of the first images, she was way too light. And I was going to give the artist that feedback, but I was like, let me give her all the feedback at one time. So sent the image to him, and he was like, in Jamaican patois, essentially she's a little too bright. Okay. So, shifted that and asked them, he was like, I'd like to see her kind of sneaking through the bush, because she was known as, her thing was camouflage and training her troops how to be completely still and camouflaging them. And so we switched from kind of an almost Statue of Liberty-esque type image to showing her with a machete, walking through the jungle. And you see a bunch of ships and stuff on fire in the background.
Oh, wow.
And so it was them who helped us kind of craft these images.
All right. And I love the collaboration that was involved with the project between you and the Maroon communities. But outside the Maroon communities, are there any other communities that you're either currently collaborating with or have an interest in collaborating with in the future?
Ooh, great question. So for the project, I wanted all Black everything as much as possible. So the artist was a Nigerian woman who was based in South Africa at the time. So it was fully diaspora. We got the continent, we got everybody here. And then I do want to visit more Maroon communities. Suriname has another large population. And I'm definitely a Pan-Africanist. That the African diaspora in the world class is definitely part of my vision and mission. And I would love to collaborate on more pre-colonial African history and African experiences and culture for K through 12 audiences. So again, there's a lot of stuff I learned in college or my doctoral program, but in K through 12, it starts at slavery, so prior to slavery, collaborating on those experiences.
Cool. And since so much of what you're talking about is really focused on the counter narratives, and we know that counter narratives are something that's been a huge topic of discussion, especially when you look at the fact that we have books being banned, we have politicians and many other parents complain about critical race theory. I don't know why. um, there's just so much opposition about students, Black and brown students, getting access to their history, getting access to who they truly are through curriculum. There's a tension there, there's a conflict, and we know why that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically around your work through EmancipatED, how does your work support educators who want to incorporate these counter narratives into their curriculum and what they do in the classroom?
Mm-hmm. So first, I really want to, shift paradigms of possibility for us. Like when you learn, at least when I learned about maroons and when I talk to other people, again, what you see as possible in our world expands.
Yes.
And I created a whole framework on how does one become a maroon, and I shared it with a friend. She was like, "This is great, but nobody even knows who maroons are." And I was like, "You're right." So that's where the first product came in. So so educators can purchase the hidden history cards that have important themes in maroonage. So you'll learn about geographic isolation and protection, self-defense, the relationships of spirituality and kinship communities. But also we cover a few of the maroon communities and maroon leaders, so they could purchase the cards. There's also, for lack of a better term, a homeschool or community school curriculum that I've developed too, that's focused on the themes of maroonage, but really bringing us all back together. You know, I grew up in the era of play cousins and playing outside in the neighborhood. So a lot of that is based on that history, like reconnecting our larger kinship networks and connecting us to our local institutions. So connecting with the Black-owned bookstore, Black-owned coffee shop, or the activist communities who are, people don't know about their work because it's not amplified yet, like having folks seek them out.
Right.
So there's that. And then I also support schools and educators and nonprofits with like similarly expanding what's possible through focusing on like non-trauma centered culturally responsive pedagogy, using community cultural wealth as like the foundation. How do we embed these practices? How do we embed these concepts in our practices? Because what I've seen a lot is folks who have a passion for the term and the thing, but don't know how to like embody it in action on a regular basis. And so I help to support that. Here's what that looks like. That thing you're doing, you're actually already doing a piece of that. You know what I'm saying? And helping them realize what they're already doing and then how we can push that forward.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. And this is my last question before we get into the lightning round. What is Dr. Crystal Menzies' freedom dream?
Ooh. That's a question. I would say true liberation is centered in community care. We let people embody their full beings, their full selves. And these larger, like capitalism, all the isms that focus on growth over humans are dismantled, and we focus on people first. And what does the community need? And creating things based on community needs. Like I live in the Bay Area, and I needed to like get out of my house because I've been working a lot, probably for 3 years in front of my computer. And I was just seeing all the wonderful, fancy schmancy buildings, and it's like all this human ingenuity that's going into people spending money. Like what can I create to get a new consumer where we have all the homelessness, like all that, imagine if all that human ingenuity and capital was focused on making sure everybody's housed, has mental health services. So that to me is what liberation looks like. What do the people need? Not how do I generate another consumer?
Right. No, and that's real. That's real. So, and we can keep on going on and on because there's just so much that we could share. But I know that time is something that we wish we always had more of, and
Mhm.
we grown adults. There's so much we have to do, with our own lives
Mhm.
and families. So I'm also mindful of that. But let's go right into the lightning round. Just a few quick hitter questions to close us out. First and foremost, what do you do these days to exercise self care?
Massages, at
Mm,
least every other week, and I find it's becoming required as I get older.
mm. Same here.
Um, so that's been like something I'm way more consistent with. And before it used to seem like a luxury. Now I realize it has to be a part of like my practice to move on a consistent basis.
Cool. And is there a book that you're currently reading or plan to read in the near future?
Well, I'm currently just wrapping up Fire and Blood. It's about, for those who watch Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, it's about the Targaryen dynasty. I like to read a lot of fantasy because a lot of the work I do is like heavy on the brain, lots of cognitive
Mhm.
lift and cognitive load. And I just want to tap out sometimes. Now, this
Yeah.
book is like taps into a lot of themes about humanity and things. So it's not quite a tap out, but I'm really enjoying
All right, something for leisure. That's always
it.
good.
Mhm.
Doesn't always have to be academy.
Mhm.
If you could invite three influential figures, dead or alive, to dinner, who would they be?
Fannie Lou Hamer, Anna Julia Cooper, and Mary Ellen Pleasant.
Mhm.
So Mary Ellen Pleasant is probably one of the first wealthy Black women in this nation, born hundreds of years ago, like during the time of enslavement, and she used her wealth to fund John Brown's raid. And to fund a lot, she actually had to move to Canada for a bit when people found out she financed the raid.
Oh,
So just how what a model she was for like, here's this thing I have and here's what I'm gonna do with it. And it's not to be to keep expanding what I have, it's to like get my people free, even though I'm
mhm.
living comfortably. Anna Julia Cooper, similarly, born into slavery and just carving out her, and then getting her doctorate at the Sorbonne in Paris, like, or France, when most people weren't traveling or doing anything. So how they created and carved out spaces for themselves. And then Fannie Lou Hamer, because there's a lot of discourse about voting and if it matters or if it doesn't. And I've seen folks quote her to say she didn't do all the work she did to force us to vote. It was to give us the choice to vote. I don't agree with that. But I want to hear it from her. I mean, she said a lot. We already know what she said, but I would like to talk to her and get her opinions on what she's hearing now and how people are maybe misrepresenting everything that she fought for.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, that'd be crucial. It'd be crucial. But listen, Crystal, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. This has been a great conversation. Hope you've enjoyed your time here.
I have.
Awesome. And just before you leave, please let our viewers and listeners know how they can connect with you on social media. And if you want to also share the Emancipated website for people to follow, this is a
Mhm.
great time to do that as well.
Okay, so the website is emancipatededucation.com. So emancipatededucation.com. You can follow me on Instagram at emancipate_ed, so ED. And LinkedIn is The Emancipated. You can follow the page there. And then if you go to emancipatededucation.com, you can also sign up for the newsletter. And just full disclosure, I'm not a content creator. So I'm not on Instagram every 2 minutes doing a reel.
There
It's
you
more of
go.
an archive and like when I have things to share and have the energy, because my grandmother just passed and it's been a lot going on. But that's where
Um,
you can find me.
so sorry to hear that. My condolences to you and your entire family
Thank you.
for the
Appreciate it.
loss. But listen, the fact that you're not really on social media just means that you're working. You're
Yes.
on that grind. You're in the lab.
Yes, very much so.
And quite frankly, more of us need to be more of us need to be in the lab more than we should be on the phones or on the screen. That's just real.
Yep.
It's got to be a balance.
I agree.
You know what I mean? We can't be fighting for liberation just on the screen. It doesn't work that way. We got to be in the trenches as well in other ways. But
yeah,
I'm not gonna go into my soapbox right now. I'll leave it there. But yeah, but thank you so much, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day. Rest up, and hopefully your week is a great one.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and likewise, hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, y'all. So we're about to end another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.